looked like pulses, and there's all sorts of wild stuff coming out of that oak tree. And that also reminds me of the guy that Jerry Gallimore first introduced at this conference, the electrolytic capacitor detector, where basically you do something like this. You have this silly little op amp sitting there, and you put in there, you set it up as normal you would, with the feedback resistor and this sort of thing, and then you hang an electrolytic capacitor between here, you put a current source here, and what happens is this thing, as the capacitor charges up, the leakage current will be dependent upon the electrolyte action in the capacitor, and you can detect Lord knows what functions with that. Some fellow with a strange name, Koloniak or something, wrote a very nice article on the same thing in Popular Electronics, and this sort of thing. Now, the interesting thing, what's an electrolytic capacitor? It's a roll. What do you think happens if you squash this roll? It changes the capacitance. The power is 1/2 CV squared. You change C, you're going to change V. Now, what happens is a gravity wave comes along and hits that roll. It's going to distort the roll. So now you got a gravity wave detector as well here.
What's interesting about that is if you use a light capacitor or a more linear type of capacitance, it becomes a velocity of light detector.
That might be.
That's the question that exists. Now, the use of electrolytic capacitors, that gives it another type of detecting ability, yes, such as the detecting ability you discovered last night in your amplifier, when the electrolytic capacitor invariably detected that the lightning storm was in progress.
Yeah, and the electrolytic capacitor, I ain't going to play anymore. I'm going to short.
But if you use a linear capacitor, being that capacitance is in the dimensions of 1/c squared, any change of velocity of light in the space bounded by the capacitor's plates will come up as a displacement current.
That's very interesting.
And what you can do is attach that thing to a strip chart recorder, and you have an apparatus which I refer to as the cosmograph, in distinction to the seismograph, which I encourage people to build and start observing.
I can understand what you're talking of with the velocity of light changing the leakage through the capacitor. That's the way I'd look at it.
Not the leakage.
I know what you're saying.
Right.
It's not the DC leakage.
Right.
It's the displacement current coming out of Ampere's law. Is it Ampere's law?
Maxwell.
Maxwell, yeah. But what did he put on the leakage current? Was it Ampere's? Coulomb's law, wasn't it?
Yeah, but leakage current's a different thing, though.
Yeah.
Leakage currents, there's two ways to produce the current.
Displacement current I'm thinking of.
Right. The leakage current is the molecular variations in capacitance with respect to time in the dielectric, and the displacement current is the basic etheric change in capacitance with respect to time. Either by changing the wave itself or changing the property of space between the capacitors, you produce a displacement current. That is probably one of the most fascinating detectors yet I've seen published, because it ties you in directly with the property of the ether, 1/c squared, or farads, depending upon how you want to look at it.
Okay, that one I hadn't seen. That was a good point.
Yeah, that was presented in radio electronics. I forget the year. Someone just showed me a photocopy of it, and it got my brain to thinking right away.
I agree with you. Okay, any other questions? Yes, sir.
I'd like to comment on the diagrams you have up there, especially the one that you discussed with Jack Day. In
the orbital beam tube.
Right. The upper diagram is, of course, lacking the current, the wire with the current flowing through it in order to get the electrons to vary.
Filament. That's the filament.
Well, that's where the electrons are generated, but they have to, the electron beam has to be curved by the presence of a
field. I said you have a magnetic field here.
Right.
Or electric field.
Okay. Jack Day's discussion of that in terms of it being a scalar detector is based on the work recently done in France that validified the Aronoff-Bohm effect. What you have to consider is that that magnetic field, or whatever you're causing the electrons to travel to be bent by, has to be shielded by a superconductor so that it eliminates the presence of the vector field. And that way you can determine that there is an actual phase shift that is not due to the vector field. If you intend to use the lower circuit to attempt the same thing, you will also have to shield its major components with a superconductor to eliminate the effects of the vector field, or you'll never notice the slight phase shifts that are due to the scalar effects.
Yes, I agree. That's why in the report here I specify you put the thing in a shielded, magnetic electric shielded container.
Right. Well, that's the only...
None of us has the money to go out and buy, liquid nitrogen type stuff. That's one very interesting thing about the possibility of superconductivity at, higher temperatures. Now that 10 degrees K or 3 degrees K.
Okay. This all relates to another comment I wanted to make. Yeah. Earlier, you talked about how most of the people who refer to scalar waves are talking about really what you refer to as a potential, basically an out-of-phase...
Well, what I was saying is scalars become a catch-all term.
Right. Okay, the work that Jack Day's done, and I can't speak for Tom Bearden because I've attempted to ask him questions, and I've never met with him or had him write back to me, so I don't know. But the scalar that they refer to is based on a Coulomb gauge transformation, well known in standard physics, and it is not the same thing as what you're referring to as a potential. So it looks like there's a fourth version at least of the types of fields that are out there.
Well, we were discussing that, friends and myself, and we think there's possibly 16 different versions of this stuff. Because you have 4 primary functions and you can permutate the whole mess. And you can get up to probably 16 realizable functions. I felt that was too advanced to discuss here.
Okay.
But okay, you brought it up. Thank you, sir. Yes, sir.
Getting back to this capacitor detector, I'm going to ask this gentleman here a question that you raised. If you're trying to detect, and again in Bearden's work he discusses a component that travels faster than the speed of light. If you were trying to detect that in the presence of the normal
you probably wouldn't use a
propagation,
capacitor detector for that.
how would you detect?
I probably most likely would attempt to stress a vacuum and look for the variations in the current flow in the stress vacuum.
Another approach to that, the thing with the detectors is what type of antenna do you use with the detector?
Yes,
Now, if you want to detect transverse electromagnetic waves, then you use a transverse electromagnetic device, such as a rhombic antenna or dipoles or something like that. But if it has the geometry of transverse electromagnetics. But the faster than light or longitudinal waves, you would use a longitudinal network, such as a stack of capacitors all in series, or transformer windings, or something where the so-called conductors are at right angles rather than in the direction the wave's coming in.
You might want to use a sphere as an antenna.
Right. That was the advantage. One of the advantages of the old-time radios is they used the large, flat spiral coils, which had longitudinal as well as transverse wave propagations. They were complex devices.
You also had the same thing in the basket weave coils, too. Any other questions? I had the feeling I opened Pandora's box here. All right, we'll close down. Yes, Jeff?
How close are we to a reliable hyperwave detector that could be production built?
I don't know. Yeah, but what is it detecting?
Well, you're bringing it up next to things that you know are putting out something.
Yes, I know.
One possible way is to use an orgone accumulator. I feel quite strongly that either the displacement current detector, or in other words, the velocity of light detector, or the 5651 detector, particularly with my experience with neon tubes that when excited by Tesla coils to start generating their own energy, which exists independent of an outside source.
There's also a lot of debate as what's coming out of a Tesla coil.
Well, that's true. That's why I knew it. But Reich himself used Tesla coils coupled with gas tubes to detect orgone. So I would recommend this as one of the first experiments into this is to build a very powerful orgone accumulator and use either the displacement current detector or the 5651 detector and look for a significant variation on the meter reading. I'd say there's a darn good chance that that's going to end up being an orgone detector, which would be a major advance right there.
Well, it seems to detect the biofields. It seems to detect very well what psychics project.
Right.
So I would agree with you on that from the intuitive base, but not fully understanding the kinematics behind the darn thing, I don't want to go on record commenting on what the thing is doing. I'm offering this as something I've seen work. I don't fully understand why it works. And I'm saying, hey, look, let's all play with it. Let's have fun with it. If you have any trouble getting 5651s, give me a call or write me. I have boxes and boxes of 5651s, and some of them have to be radioactive.
One thing I would like to point out, using the radioactive 5651s in association with orgone could do two possible things, either simultaneously or independently. Okay, first of all, being that radioactivity agitates orgone, it may incredibly increase the sensitivity of the detector to orgone.
Well, that's why I use the radioactive version.
But at the same time, the thing is it makes the orgone nasty. So there's some complications there. In other words, it makes a mess in the process of detecting. So I would warn experimenters to start off with the non-radioactive versions to be on the safe side.
Really enough radioactivity in the thing to cause
no, it does. It's cumulative. It produces, when orgone and radioactivity mix, you get an anti-radioactivity. The thermodynamic process of diffusive decay, which radioactivity essentially is turned around, and Reich found that even the most minuscule quantity of radioactivity just builds to enormous values until the radioactivity itself becomes a property of space that you can't take away.
Back in January, Sam Lentine reported on...
Well, we're cutting this off at 10, by the way. So if you want to have, if you want to hear how the sound system and the mind amp works, we ought to continue and maybe discuss all this later.
I just wanted to mention that Sam Lentine has done a lot of work in this area and confirms just exactly what Eric has just reported.
And what I've seen also, yes.
Yeah, I've dealt with what Reich called Oriner as well, the radioactive excited energy fields, and if you want to play with detectors, don't play with Oriner.
All right, so use the non-radioactive 5651s. The degree of sensitivity is about half on the non-radioactive ones. Okay, let's at this point cut the questions off on detectors. All right. All right, I'm going to go through this once more again, how recording processes have hyperspatial energies on them and how to recover them. This is not the minefield amp at this point. This is the 3D sound system. All right, if you have a microphone, we'll use as a model the dynamic microphone, the one with the moving coil in it, or a moving ribbon, or whatever you want to say. I can tell you condenser mics or electrostatics mic work just as well, but we don't have the math to, relate the two. But we do have the math to relate the magnetic field. If we go back to this diagram somewhere here, where is it? The Hindu thing. Yeah, yin and yang. Okay. Our minds exist in them as well as us. But it exists on the subconscious level. Any good parapsychologist will tell you that. Now, as I stressed before, you can have a cross-field product here, a pointing product here, or you can have a pointing product here. Now, being that the magnetic field is the coupling between these two functions, that's saying the magnetic field is the bridge from here to there. Now, as a coil moves, as it accelerates and decelerates, it creates a very slight stress or warp in this wall, allows the energy to come through. Well, now, our biofield has a high component. The etheric field has a high component leakage back and forth. So what this is saying is that energy here, wave propagation here, will end up as an image here. This is what most people commonly refer to as a scalar wave. Let's not start debating on what is a real scalar wave. I'm saying basically what most people call a scalar wave, psychic energy, orgone, who knows, it may have this as a component. I feel that psychic energy in orgone, of course, has many more components than this. But what is happening, as that coil moves through, it makes little bridges between the domain. We end up with, on the output of the wire, coming out of this microphone. I don't know whether this is dynamic or not, but let's say it is. You have the electron stream, which is the compressions and rarefactions moving the coil, generating the electricity that flows through the wire, the real power stuff. You hook up to another microphone, put this in a noisy room, and listen to the other mic, and you get a transfer of sound. That's real power. Also, you have the etheric currents coming out on the wire as well. So it's saying, wherever this goes, you got etheric current, and you got electrical current. Now, when you record this, what happens? Now we go multidimensional, which I don't want to discuss the authorization to go multidimensional or not. I don't want to get into that bucket of worms. I know there are people here that don't believe in multidimensional stuff. But let's say we have multidimensional stuff. So what this is saying is this recording, Laserdisc, magnetic tape, phonograph records, whatever have you. It has an image in this domain also, as well as here. It has an image in the magnetic domain. That means that in our domain, the electrical representation of the sound pressure wave gets recorded. Layered on top of this is everything else. Tom Bearden, in one lecture many times, talked of years ago that either everything is there or nothing is there. That has been a theme that's pervaded through these conferences. I believe that myself. So what that's saying, now you got this recording that in all the other domains, everything's there. Now, of course, the average player, what does it do? It plays basically, I'll move back so it doesn't howl. What does it do? It picks up whatever the variation that creates, the light or the magnetic field or the squiggles on the record, converts it to electrical energy. Now, let's say you had a pickup that was capable of also picking up the etherics, which, as it turns out, most of the pickups do. Coming out of the pickup, you have the etheric, which is a catch-all term for everything, or scalar, whatever you want to call it, and the electrical representation of the compression sound waves. Now, on the normal recording, this etheric is all distorted. It's all phased, different frequencies, different phases. Let's say you had a device that could pick up this etheric signal, rephase it, bring it back in, so now it's aligned as it originally was. What you would have then is going out of your recording system, you would have basically this line. Now, just as the microphone picks up the etheric function because the coil is moving, and as it accelerates and decelerates, it generates spikes and such of etheric, your speaker does the same thing. As your coil is moving in and out with the correlated audio signal, you only need about 30 or 20% correlation to get it. You'll also get the same etheric energy coming out of the speaker. Of course, if you have an amplifier system that responds to all these things, such as a vacuum tube system, it helps. This is basically what the 3D sound system is. If you go into a recording studio, I spent many years in a recording studio, take the output of the microphone, put it into a good push-pull vacuum tube preamp, into a good vacuum tube power amp, and go into stereo mic, stereo amplifier, stereo speaker. Sit there, point the speaker so that the vectors cross at 90 degrees, and I think we all know what that means in geometrics. You put the mic so that they cross at 90 degrees, and this is what a lot of recording practices do to get the good stereo imaging, this way in the orchestra. If you use two mics, that's why I like two mics. When you start mixing, now the first track that's laid down appears up in the ceiling, and it goes down as you get less and less mixes. As you get to a closer track to the real time, you get a time that the time becomes a spatial height placement, as well as getting the placement of the height of the original orchestra. So it's saying now, when you listen to a live performance, you hear binaural in your ear. You get all the phasing and all that stuff. But also, your ESP senses will pick up all this biofield that this thing is spewing out at you. Your aura, biofield sensors, ESP, that's a detector. Now, if this is correlated to the sound field, what will happen is it will fill in the extra dimensionality that's missing from the binaural recording, and next thing you know, you got point source surround sound, such as I have here. This is my theory. Of course, we have nothing to prove this, just that you flick the switch and the thing works. This is the theory I build around what I've observed. And someone can prove to me that that theory is wrong, we'll look for another theory. Remember, true science changes every day. As you find something that says, whoops, you got the wrong theory. You consider that and go to a new theory. Lord knows, my theory has changed from year to year. Now, what is the minefield amplifier? Let's say you can take this amplifier transducer system that's sensitive to etheric energy and projects etheric energy. Let's say somehow you could have a sensor that picks up the etheric energy, and what you do simplest form would be the pickup, PU, your amplifier, and your transducer, your output, or a speaker. Of course, this is the typical PA system. If I get too close to that speaker there, the thing's going to howl. Let's say you can shield this thing against sound. You'll absorb the sound. What's going to happen? Theoric's going to come out of here, go in here, it's going to oscillate. Of course, you got no carrier at this point. I will get into that in a minute or two. Now, let's say that we expand this to go into two-space. Let's say you have pickup 1 and pickup 2. Transducer 1 and transducer 2. And you connect them by amplifiers, but opposed.
Can you stand to one side, Preston? We aren't picking that up on camera. Thank you.
Well, when I'm finished, we can stand to one side, and you oppose them. What's going to happen? Now you're going to get cross flows this way. In here, you got your 90-degree geometry. You know, everything repeats in 90 degrees. That's part of the cosmic series of geometry. Let's not go into that, really. But when you cross it, you get much stronger feedback. Now, one thing's missing. What moves the diaphragm, I mean the coil, in these transducers? Okay. You need a correlation. In other words, when music is going in the mic, the etheric patterns correlate with the sound patterns. Therefore, the coil is moving in correlation with the music, and the etheric, therefore, is transferred. This will not work. You have to put one other thing in. What you have to do is you have to take the transducer and now pump it with a speaker. Yeah? Yeah? Hello? Now, what you do here is you feed in your correlated carrier.
Do you mean to put those on the transducers or on the pickups?
On the pickups. These are transducers. Now, what can we use as a correlated carrier? What's a stochastic process? Totally random. The stochastic process, if you go through all the mathematics, you can prove is 50% correlated to anything and everything, including Joe passing wind down the street. You got a 50% correlation in a stochastic process. What's a stochastic? Fine, fine. Okay, what's a stochastic process? White noise. Okay, white noise. So you drive this speaker driver from a white noise source. Now, what you've got is the white noise, and it's carrying the etherics. All you got to do now is detect it. Detectors. Aha. You take your white noise source, the output of your white noise as it's going into the speakers, and you go into a mixer. You put your white noise in. And then you take your output of your pickup and you put it into the mixer. What's going to come out here? A convolution of the white noise and the input signal. That means now you've just taken your etheric function and removed it and separated it, so your amplifier and speaker can now launch it again. That means now when you set this thing up with your mixer here and here, and you mix here, and you mix here, that's the mind amp. Now,
That makes it a balanced modulator.
yeah.
So the noise doesn't really come through, it just serves.
Yes, it does, because the path this way is in the unbalanced mode. This is the balanced path. So the noise still comes through. But you need that same noise to move the voice coil in the transmitting transducer. But you want to phase the etheric function properly, and that's what this will do for you. This will phase the etheric function. And I don't want to go into tons of stochastic process mathematics to prove it. Now, Lynn Segella came up with some very nice things. What else she call it? Fractals, yes, fractals. Now, what do we use for this noise source? Eric, I'm sure, will know what a Gaussian noise source is. That's the silly little gas diode sitting in a magnetic field, and you pull current through the gas diode, and the magnetic field agitates, and you got white noise. What happens inside the tube? If you look at that tube, you got nice blue gaseous patterns that look exactly like what Lynn was saying was fractals. She's saying that the fractal is equivalent to a stochastic web. She's saying the stochastic web is the basic building block of everything. This is the carrier. That's what makes this thing work, is that stochastic web made by the noise source. Where does that come from? Master vibrations of hyperspace. So now, let's say we turn this thing on just as it is. What's going to happen? Ether is going to start coming out of here, just because there's noise in the system, like any other oscillator. It's going to pass this way, it's going to pass this way, it's going to feed back. Things are going to start to oscillate, etherically. Now, this is the feedback coupled path. What do we do in electronics with a crystal? We put it in the feedback coupled path. That means now you sit a etheric pattern, a dynamic etheric pattern. Of course, we got 30 or 40 of them in this room, called human beings. You sit a human being here. What happens? Human being gets nice and relaxed from the white noise. That's what the in-domain people will tell you. What happens? Now, the human being sinks this oscillator into his own vibratory form. And as this transmits this way, you got a dissipative fractal that dumps energy. When it's dumped and clear, it now becomes a absorptive fractal. As it passes through the dynamic function, it picks up the dynamic of the function, amplifies it, sends it back, keeps going around and around and around. And as the fractals pick up and dissipate, the person's fields build up. Now, this is what I call my traditional mind amplifier system, mind field amplifier. Let's say now we do something else cute. This and this is a speaker. This and this is an audio amplifier. Let's say we inject here and here a musical program that is etherically corrected. What's going to happen? The etheric component of the music is going to go in here. The speakers are going to play. What's going to happen as this thing oscillates and builds up, it's going to build up the etheric component. Now, when the person sits here, now the person is building up a stochastic web at the point. What is that? A sonic hologram. And that's what that thing over there does. Now, when you build this up, the image, the etheric image becomes so strong that a good sensitive or a poor sensitive can read the image. What we have over there, if you look over there, all right, let's do this. Let's take a break for 2 or 3 minutes, and we'll move everything over there, and I'll describe what's happening here. Okay? You can go all the way to the white wire. Yeah, this seat is just outside the field. Okay, do we have everybody here that wants to try it? Huh? We will. But first I want to describe what's going on here. Okay, we back on the air? Okay. This box here, this has a microphone element, a group of microphone elements arranged in a very strange esoteric pattern. And on this side and this side is a speaker. That box, same thing. There is the speaker amplifier for the output. Now, if I bring up the noise source control,